Twin Falls, a quiet town in Idaho, was known for its serene beauty. The crisp autumn air had just started settling over the hills, and the students at Twin Falls High School shuffled lazily to their classes. It was just an ordinary school day, or so it seemed. Cassie Bishop sat in her usual seat near the back of the classroom, staring out the window as the golden leaves fluttered in the breeze. The teacher had fallen ill, and the school had hired a new substitute teacher to fill in. When Mrs. Donovan had first introduced Mr. Aldrich to the class, he seemed like every other substitute, stern but polite. Yet there was something unnervingly different about him. Cassie noticed it on his first day. Mr. Aldrich never blinked. His eyes, a dull shade of blue, scanned the room with unnatural precision, like he could see into each student's soul. He never once looked at his lesson plan, never stumbled over words, and seemed to always know what was going to happen before it did. Every question a student asked was met with the perfect response, almost rehearsed. "Class, remember the assignment for tomorrow. I'll expect your papers to be thorough and insightful," he said in that calm, collected voice, as if daring someone to challenge him. Cassie exchanged a glance with her best friend, Megan Grady. Megan rolled her eyes but smiled, nudging Cassie with her elbow. "He's weird, right?" Megan whispered. Cassie nodded. "Yeah, there's something off about him." For the next few days, everything seemed to function as it always had, except for one nagging feeling that Cassie couldn't shake. Students around her began acting strangely. Emily, the class overachiever, sat one day with a blank stare, unable to recall her own birthday during roll call. Another day, Josh, who usually sat behind Cassie, didn't show up at all. No one mentioned his absence. Even the teacher seemed unconcerned. One evening, Cassie called Megan. "Have you noticed anything weird at school lately?" she asked. "Weird how?" Megan's voice was nonchalant, but Cassie could hear the undercurrent of unease. "I mean, other than Aldrich being creepy as hell?" "Yeah, I've noticed." "Megan, it's more than that," Cassie said, her voice shaky. "People, they're starting to forget things, important things. Yesterday, Logan didn't even remember what year it was. He looked confused, like he had no clue what was going on. And Josh hasn't been to school in days." "Josh? He's been out sick, right?" Megan replied, though her voice wavered. "I don't think so. No one's even talking about him. It's like he never existed. Have you heard anyone mention his name?" There was a long pause. "No," Megan admitted. "But maybe you're just overthinking this. It's probably just a coincidence." Cassie wanted to believe Megan, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. There was something deeply wrong with Mr. Aldrich, and it was starting to affect everyone. The next day, as the bell rang for the last class, Cassie sat in her usual spot, eyes fixed on the substitute teacher. He stood at the front of the room, motionless, his pale face framed by the dim light coming in from the windows. It was unnaturally silent. "Good afternoon, class," Mr. Aldrich began. "Today we'll be reviewing for the exam on Friday." Cassie's mind raced. She wasn't even sure what the subject was anymore. How had they gotten to this point in the curriculum? Her memory felt foggy, as though a heavy mist was rolling in over her thoughts. She glanced around the room and saw the same vacant expressions on her classmates' faces. She looked at Megan, who had always been sharp, her witty remarks cutting through even the most boring of lessons. But now Megan was staring straight ahead, unblinking, her mouth slightly open. Cassie whispered her name, but Megan didn't respond. That was when it hit her. Megan had no idea who she was. Panic surged through Cassie's veins. The fog that clouded her brain lifted for just a moment, and she realized what was happening. Mr. Aldrich wasn't human. He was something else. Something that was taking pieces of them, feeding off their memories, their identities. Cassie's heart pounded. She had to act before it was too late. She raised her hands slowly, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Mr. Aldrich, I have a question." His eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. "Yes, Cassandra?" Cassie swallowed hard. How did he know her full name? No one ever called her that. "I don't remember when we were given the assignment. Could you remind me?" She hoped it sounded innocent enough, but her mind was racing with fear. Mr. Aldrich smiled, an eerie, knowing smile. Of course, you'll remember soon enough. Cassie shuddered. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair over. I need to go to the bathroom, she blurted, not waiting for a response. She rushed out of the classroom, the hallway cold and empty. As she reached the bathroom, she splashed water on her face, trying to calm herself. Her reflection in the mirror looked paler than usual, her brown eyes wide with fear. What was happening? Who could she tell? She heard a sound, a slow, deliberate footstep, echoing down the hall. Cassie froze. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her feet felt glued to the floor. The door to the bathroom creaked open. Mr. Aldrich stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on her, that same cold smile on his face. You can't run, Cassandra, he said, his voice low and unnaturally calm. I already know who you are, and soon you won't even remember yourself. Cassie's pulse thundered in her ears. She needed to escape, but her thoughts were growing heavier, her memories slipping away like sand through her fingers. Stay away from me, she shouted, backing into the corner. But Mr. Aldrich just stood there, his expression never faltering. You'll forget soon enough, he whispered. Cassie's breath quickened as her back pressed against the cold, tiled wall of the bathroom. Her mind was a blur, her thoughts slipping from her grasp like fleeting shadows. She tried to focus on one thing, anything to anchor herself, but even her name felt distant, like a word she'd once known but no longer recognized. Mr. Aldrich stood at the door, unmoving, his eerie smile lingering like a predator savoring its prey. You see, Cassandra, memories are fragile things. They're easy to lose and even easier to take. Cassie's legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to move. She lunged toward the sink, grabbing a heavy metal soap dispenser and hurling it at him. It clattered to the floor with a hollow thud, missing him entirely. He didn't even flinch. I'll scream, she threatened, though her voice was hoarse and shaky. Mr. Aldrich took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. No one will hear you. They're all forgetting, just like you will. Cassie bolted. She pushed past him with all her strength, running into the hallway. The school was deathly silent, as if it had been abandoned for years. She had no idea where she was running, just that she had to get away. Get away before he took the last remnants of her identity. Her shoes squeaked against the polished linoleum as she raced through the empty halls. Every classroom she passed seemed darker, the windows smeared with a thick grime that hadn't been there earlier. Her chest burned with panic, but she kept moving, her mind fighting to hold on to the fragments of herself that were slipping away. Suddenly, she spotted a familiar figure up ahead. Megan. She was standing by her locker, but something was wrong. Megan was staring blankly at the wall, her hand frozen in mid-motion, as if she had forgotten what she was doing. Cassie rushed to her, shaking her friend's shoulders. Megan, snap out of it, Cassie pleaded, her voice frantic. Megan blinked slowly, her eyes dull, unfocused. Cassie? She murmured, but her voice was distant, hollow, like she wasn't really there. Megan, it's me. We need to get out of here. Something's wrong with Mr. Aldrich. Cassie shook her again, harder this time. But Megan just stared through her, as if she were looking at a stranger. I don't... Who are you? Cassie's heart sank. Megan was slipping away just like the others. Tears welled up in her eyes as she backed away, helpless. Behind her, she heard the steady, deliberate footsteps of Mr. Aldrich approaching, his voice echoing through the hall like a dark melody. You see, Cassandra, they're all mine now. Their memories, their identities. They belong to me, and soon so will yours. Cassie whirled around, her fear boiling over into raw, desperate anger. What are you? She shouted, her voice cracking. Why are you doing this? Mr. Aldrich paused, his eyes narrowing. I am what has always been here, lurking in the shadows of forgotten things. A shape, a presence that feeds on the essence of those who are lost. Children like you, so full of potential, so easy to consume. Cassie's hands clenched into fists. She wasn't going to let this thing take her. She wasn't going to let it erase her like it had done to Megan, to Josh, to all the others. She turned and sprinted again, her feet pounding against the floor, her body propelled by sheer adrenaline. But no matter how fast she She could still hear his footsteps behind her, slow and patient, as if he knew there was nowhere left for her to go. Cassie's mind raced. She needed to think, to do something before she lost herself completely. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. Then she saw it, the school's old boiler room, tucked away at the end of a deserted corridor. It was dark, dusty, and forgotten, just like she was beginning to feel. With no other choice, she darted inside and slammed the heavy door behind her, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. The room was cold and damp, the smell of rust and decay filling the air. Pipes crisscrossed the ceiling, and the faint hum of the boiler rumbled beneath the floor. Cassie backed into the shadows, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She crouched low, her heart pounding in her ears. She had to think. She had to fight back. There had to be a way to stop him. Moments later, the door creaked open. Mr. Aldrich stepped inside, his figure silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. "You can't hide from me, Cassandra. It's only a matter of time before you forget who you are," he said, his voice soft but menacing. Cassie's mind was spiraling, but then it hit her, a way out. She remembered what he had said. He feeds on memories, on identities. Maybe, just maybe, she could use that against him. She stood slowly, forcing herself to appear calm, though her insides were trembling. "You want my memories, don't you?" she said, her voice wavering. "Well, take them. I don't need them anymore." Mr. Aldrich tilted his head, intrigued. "What are you doing?" Cassie forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "I don't care about my past. Take it. All of it. I'm ready to let go." For a moment there was silence. Mr. Aldrich's expression wavered, his confidence flickering like a dying flame. Cassie could feel it, his hesitation, his uncertainty. He thrived on resistance, on fear, but if she surrendered willingly, maybe he wouldn't be able to take her. She took a step forward. "Take it," she said, her voice stronger now. "Take everything. I'm not afraid anymore." Mr. Aldrich's eyes widened, a ripple of something, fear, passing over his face. Then with a sudden snarl, he lunged at her. But Cassie was ready. She ducked, grabbing a loose pipe from the ground and swinging it with all her strength. The metal connected with a sickening crunch, and Mr. Aldrich staggered backward, his form flickering, like a shadow losing its hold on reality. "No!" he screamed, his voice twisting into something inhuman, otherworldly. Cassie swung again, harder this time, and Mr. Aldrich's shape shimmered, dissolving into a thick, black mist that swirled around her before vanishing into the air. For a long moment, there was only silence. Cassie stood there, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. It was over. She had won. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face, a mix of relief and exhaustion. But as the darkness of the room closed in around her, she couldn't shake one lingering thought. Who was she again?